The Sodder children. Disappearance. The night 5. Children vanished into thin air. On Christmas Eve 1945, a fire consumed a house in the hills of West Virginia. When the flames died, 5 children were gone. No bones, no bodies, no trace. The fire burned hot, but not hot enough to erase 5 human beings from existence. For over 70 years, one family clung to a single, terrifying question. Were our children stolen from us while we slept? Fayetteville, West Virginia. A small, quiet town nestled in the Appalachian Hills, the kind of place where everybody knows your name and your business. In 1945, the war had just ended. Soldiers were coming home. America was exhaling after years of sacrifice and rationing. Families were looking forward to peace, to normalcy, to Christmas mornings filled with laughter and the crinkle of wrapping paper. The Sodder family was one of those families. George and Jennie Sodder, Italian immigrants who had carved out a respectable life in this coal country town, had 10 children. 10. Their home sat on a hillside along Route 21, a 2-story wooden house full of noise, full of love, full of life. George ran a trucking business. Jennie kept the household running with an iron will and a warm heart. They were the kind of family that neighbors admired, hard-working, close-knit, unapologetically large. But on the night of December 24th, 1945, something happened inside that house that would become one of America's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. A fire broke out in the dead of night. By the time morning came, the house was ash, and 5 of the Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, had vanished. Not died, vanished. Because in the ruins of that house, despite extensive searching, not a single bone, not a single tooth, not a single fragment of any child was ever found. What happened in that house? And more importantly, what happened to those children? To understand the darkness that descended on Christmas Eve, you first need to understand the family it consumed. George Sodder was born Giorgio Sodder in Sardinia, Italy in 1895. He immigrated to the United States as a young man, eventually settling in the coalfields of West Virginia. He anglicized his name, married Jennie Cipriani, also of Italian descent, and together they built a life that embodied the American dream. George started a small trucking business that grew steadily. He hauled coal, gravel, construction materials. He was known as a fair employer and a reliable businessman. He was also known as a man with opinions, strong ones. George was outspoken in his criticism of Benito Mussolini's fascist regime in Italy. This might seem like a minor detail in the hills of West Virginia, but it was not. Italian immigrant communities in America during the 1930s and 1940s were often deeply divided over Mussolini. Some viewed Il Duce as a source of national pride. Others, like George, saw him as a tyrant and said so loudly and publicly. This did not make him popular with everyone. In fact, it earned him enemies whose identities and motives would later take on a sinister significance. Jennie was the backbone of the home. Managing 10 children in a 2-story house required organizational genius, and by all accounts, she possessed it. The children ranged widely in age. By December 1945, some of the older children had already left home or were working. The 5 youngest, Maurice, age 14, Martha, age 12, Louis, age 9, Jennie Jr., age 8, and Betty, age 5, still lived in the house. They were typical kids of their era. They went to school. They played in the hills. They helped with chores. They fought and laughed and dreamed about what Santa would bring them. The older Sodder children, John, age 23, George Jr., age 16, Marion, age 17, and Sylvia, age 2, would also be in the house that Christmas Eve. The house was full, the tree was decorated, presents were wrapped and waiting. It was, by every measure, supposed to be a perfect holiday. But there were warning signs, small, strange events in the weeks and months leading up to that night that the family would only piece together in hindsight. A life insurance salesman had visited the home earlier that year. When George declined to purchase a policy, the salesman reportedly made an unsettling remark. He told George that his house would go up in smoke. He added chillingly that George's children would be destroyed. George dismissed it as the bitter words of a man who'd lost a sale. But was it bitterness? Or was it prophecy? There were other incidents. A man was seen near the Sodder property, watching the house, studying the road that led up to it. Strangers had been observed around the yard. Someone had tampered with the phone line. And sometime in the fall of 1945, someone had stolen a block and tackle, a heavy-duty pulley system, from George's trucking yard. None of these events seemed connected at the time. Each one, taken alone, was easy to dismiss. But taken together, they formed a pattern of surveillance, a pattern of preparation, a pattern that pointed toward something deliberate. Christmas Eve arrived, and the Sodder household buzzed with the familiar chaos of a large family preparing for the holiday. Jennie had prepared a feast. The younger children were too excited to sleep. They begged to stay up late, and Jennie relented. She let them play upstairs in the bedrooms while the rest of the family settled in for the night. George fell asleep on the couch downstairs. Jennie went to bed around midnight. The older children, John, George Jr., and Marion, slept on the ground floor or in nearby rooms. Upstairs, 5 children were wide awake, whispering about Christmas morning. They had no idea they were living their last hours in that house. Nobody did. At approximately 12:30 in the morning on Christmas Day, the phone rang. Jennie Sodder answered it. On the other end was a woman's voice, unfamiliar, asking for someone whose name Jennie didn't recognize. The caller laughed, and Jennie could hear what sounded like a party in the background: clinking glasses, conversation, music. She told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up. But something nagged at her as she walked back through the house. She noticed that the front door was unlocked. Odd. She also noticed that the lights were still on in the upstairs rooms, and she thought she could hear the curtains fluttering. A window might have been left open. She considered going upstairs to check on the children, to turn off the lights, to close the window. She didn't. She went back to bed. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. At approximately 1 a.m., Jennie was jolted awake by a loud bang on the roof. It sounded like something had been thrown or dropped onto the top of the house. Then she smelled smoke. Within moments, the fire was everywhere. Flames were crawling up the walls. Smoke was filling the rooms. Jennie screamed for George. George leaped from the couch. Together with John, George Jr., Marion, and little 2-year-old Sylvia, they scrambled out of the house. Jennie counted heads in the freezing darkness. 7 people stood in the yard. 5 were missing: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie Jr., Betty. They were upstairs. George lunged back toward the house. The fire was already engulfing the second floor. He tried to reach the staircase, but the flames drove him back. He ran to the side of the house and looked for a ladder, the same ladder that had always leaned against the exterior wall. It was gone. Vanished. He searched frantically. Nothing. George then tried to use his truck to position himself closer to the upper windows. The truck wouldn't start. He tried the second truck. It also wouldn't start. Neither vehicle had had any mechanical issues the day before. Both were now completely dead. Desperate, George tried to climb the exterior wall with his bare hands. He burned himself badly. He screamed the children's names into the roaring fire. There was no answer. No cries. No screams from above. Nothing but the sound of a house being consumed. Marion ran to the nearest neighbor to call the fire department. But the phone, the Sodder family's phone line, was dead. It had been cut, not disconnected, not damaged by the fire. Cut. Marion had to run further to another neighbor's house to reach a phone. The call to the Fayetteville Fire Department went out, but the response was staggeringly slow. The fire department was only about 2.5 miles away, yet they did not arrive until approximately 8 a.m., nearly 7 hours after the fire began. By then, there was nothing left. The 2-story wooden house had collapsed into a smoldering pile of ash and debris, no more than a few feet deep. 7 hours, 5 missing children, and a pile of rubble that told a story nobody wanted to hear. Fire Chief F.J. Maurice conducted an initial search of the debris. He spent less than an hour examining the site. His conclusion was swift. The children had died in the fire, and the blaze had burned so hot that their remains had been completely cremated, reduced to nothing. Bones, teeth, all of it, gone. He declared the fire accidental, likely caused by faulty wiring. Case closed. But was it? Could a house fire, even an intense one, truly obliterate 5 human bodies so completely that not even a fragment of bone remained? Cremation ovens operate at temperatures between 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. and even they leave behind several pounds of bone and tooth fragments per body. A residential house fire fueled by wood and common household materials typically reaches between 800 and 1200 degrees. And 5 bodies. 5 growing children with dense developing bones. The mathematics of incineration did not add up. They never would. George and Jennie Sodder refused to accept the official explanation. They knew, with the certainty that only parents can possess, that something was profoundly wrong. The missing ladder, the dead trucks, the severed phone line, the strange phone call at 12:30 a.m., the insurance salesman's threat, the watchers near the house. None of these things pointed to a simple accident. Every one of them pointed to something orchestrated. George began his own investigation almost immediately. He hired a private investigator, the first of several over the coming decades. He started questioning neighbors, townspeople, anyone who might have seen or heard something that night. And what he uncovered only deepened the mystery. A witness came forward, a woman named Mrs. Cornelia Henthorne, who claimed she had seen the fire from a nearby hillside. She said she watched from a distance and saw no one at the upstairs windows, no children screaming, no small faces pressed against the glass. But she also reported something else. She had seen objects being thrown from the roof of the house just before the flames fully erupted. What those objects were, she could not say, but the detail was chilling. Were those objects the source of the loud bang Jennie heard on the roof? Were they incendiary devices? Another witness, a truck driver passing through Fayetteville on Route 21 that night, reported seeing what appeared to be people carrying something or someone away from the burning house. He did not stop. He did not report it until later. But his account added another layer of dread to the narrative. George also discovered that the local telephone repairman had found that the phone line to the Sodder home had been cut, not burned, not melted, but severed cleanly, at a point some distance from the house, well away from where the fire could have reached it. This was not fire damage. This was sabotage. Then there was the matter of the block and tackle, the pulley system stolen from George's yard months earlier. George became convinced it had been used to remove the ladder from the side of the house. Someone had planned this. Someone had cut off every avenue of rescue. Someone had wanted those children to disappear, or to make it look like they had burned. In 1947, George took the extraordinary step of having the site re-excavated. He hired a team to dig down deeper into the foundation and soil beneath where the house had stood. They sifted through every cubic foot of earth. They found household items, pots, pans, coins, appliance parts. They found the remnants of a rubber boot. They found no human bones, not one, not a vertebra, not a skull fragment, not a single tooth. 5 children, and the earth had swallowed not a trace of them. A pathologist named Oscar B. Hunter was consulted. He stated unequivocally that a house fire of the type and duration described could not have completely destroyed 5 human bodies. He pointed out that even in the most extreme fires, industrial furnaces, wartime bombings, skeletal remains persist. Teeth, in particular, are among the most resilient structures in the human body, capable of withstanding temperatures far exceeding anything a residential fire could produce. If those children had been in that house when it burned, there would be evidence. There was none. George and Jennie went public. They erected a billboard along Route 21 near the site of their destroyed home. It featured photographs of the 5 missing children and a simple, desperate question. What happened to our children? That billboard would stand for decades, its paint fading and refreshing with the seasons, a monument to unresolved grief and unanswered questions. It became one of the most recognized missing persons displays in American history. The Sodders also began receiving tips, anonymous letters, phone calls in the night, strangers approaching them in parking lots with whispered fragments of information. Most led nowhere. Some were cruel hoaxes, but a few were deeply troubling. As years passed, the Sodder case refused to die. George and Jennie's relentless pursuit of the truth kept the story alive in West Virginia and beyond, and the tips kept coming, some of them startling in their specificity. In the early 1950s, a woman in a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, told a traveling saleswoman that she knew about the Sodder children. She said the children had not died in the fire. She said they had been taken. She described details about the family that were not public knowledge. When investigators tried to locate the woman, she had vanished, checked out of the hotel, left no forwarding address, and was never found. Around the same time, multiple witnesses in and around Fayetteville reported seeing the Sodder children after the fire. One woman claimed she had seen all 5 children in a car with Florida license plates on Christmas morning 1945, just hours after the fire. She said the children appeared frightened but unharmed, and that 2 adults, a man and a woman of Italian appearance, were with them. Another witness, a hotel worker in Charleston, said she had served breakfast to 4 children matching the descriptions of the Sodder kids, accompanied by 2 dark-complexioned adults who spoke in Italian. The children seemed scared, she said. They were unusually quiet. When she tried to engage them in conversation, one of the adults told her to mind her own business. These accounts were never corroborated by law enforcement. The police and fire investigators in Fayette County maintained their original position. The children had died in the fire. Case closed. They showed little interest in pursuing alternative theories, and George became increasingly convinced that local authorities were either incompetent or complicit, or both. Then, in 1967, an event occurred that reignited the case in the most unsettling way possible. Jennie Sodder received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, a portrait of a young man, approximately 30 years old. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie, Illil Boys, A90132 or 35. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The return address was a hotel in Kentucky. When investigators traveled to the hotel, the staff had no record of the sender. No one recalled who had mailed the envelope. Jennie stared at that photograph for hours. She compared it to pictures of her son Louis as a boy. She studied the eyes, the jawline, the shape of the ears. She became convinced, utterly unshakably convinced, that the man in the photograph was her son. Louis, alive, grown. Somewhere out there in the world, carrying a number instead of a name. George hired another private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to trace the letter. The investigator traveled to the area, checked into a hotel to begin his work, and was never heard from again. He simply disappeared. His reports, if he had written any, were never recovered. No one was ever able to explain what happened to him. Was this a coincidence? Was this the work of someone or some organization that did not want the truth uncovered? The Sodders believed the latter. George, who had always suspected that his outspoken criticism of Mussolini had put his family in the crosshairs of pro-fascist sympathizers, now believed that his children had been kidnapped, taken as retribution, or perhaps sold, and that powerful forces were actively working to prevent their recovery. The theory was not as outlandish as it might sound. During the 1930s and 1940s, pro-Mussolini organizations operated openly in Italian-American communities across the United States. Some of these groups were connected to organized crime. George had received threats before the fire, not just from the insurance salesman, but from individuals who told him to stop speaking against Mussolini. One man had reportedly warned him that his children would pay for his political views. Could this have been more than empty intimidation? George Sodder spent the remaining decades of his life in pursuit of the truth. He and Jennie poured their savings into private investigators, advertisements, and legal efforts to force a reinvestigation. They wrote to governors, senators, the FBI. They appeared in newspapers and on radio programs. They became, in essence, America's most persistent parents, a couple who refused to mourn children they believed were still alive. The billboard on Route 21 was updated periodically. New photographs were added. The reward amount was increased. Age-progressed images were eventually created showing what the children might look like as adults. The billboard became a landmark. Travelers on Route 21 would slow down to read it, and many would feel a chill run down their spines as they stared into the eyes of 5 children who had vanished on Christmas Eve. But despite all their efforts, the Sodders never found their children. They never received a definitive answer. They never stood in a courtroom and watched justice served. The local fire marshal's ruling of accidental death was never officially overturned, even though the absence of remains made it scientifically untenable. No suspect was ever arrested. No kidnapper was ever identified. No organization was ever held accountable. George Sodder died on August 8, 1969, at the age of 74. He died without knowing what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie Jr., and Betty. Jennie survived him by many years, passing away on May 31, 1989, at the age of 84. She too died without answers. In her final years, she reportedly kept the mysterious photograph of the young man she believed to be Louis on her nightstand. She looked at it every night before she went to sleep. The surviving Sodder children, John, George Jr., Marion, and Sylvia, continued the search after their parents' deaths, though with diminishing resources and fading hope. Sylvia Sodder Paxton, the youngest surviving child who had been only 2 years old on the night of the fire, became the family's primary spokesperson. She maintained a website, responded to tips, and kept the case in the public consciousness well into the 21st century. She never gave up believing that her brothers and sisters had survived that night. The fire itself was reinvestigated, informally by journalists, authors, and amateur sleuths, dozens of times over the decades. Every reinvestigation reached the same conclusion. The evidence overwhelmingly suggested that the fire was deliberately set, the children were not in the house when it burned, and a coordinated effort was made to prevent rescue and obscure the truth. Yet no official body ever launched a formal criminal investigation. The Sodder children's disappearance remains officially unsolved. No bodies were ever recovered, no suspects were ever charged. No definitive explanation has ever been offered by law enforcement that accounts for all the evidence, or the lack thereof. The most widely accepted theory among researchers and true crime analysts is that the fire was arson, set as a cover for the kidnapping of the 5 children. The severed phone line, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the absence of human remains, the eyewitness accounts of the children being seen alive after the fire. All of these point toward a coordinated operation, not a random accident. Who was behind it? Theories range from pro-Mussolini operatives seeking revenge against George for his political outspokenness, to organized crime elements operating in the Italian-American community, to local individuals with personal grudges who may have used the political angle as cover. Some have even speculated about involvement by corrupt local officials, pointing to the fire department's inexplicable 7-hour response time and the fire marshal's hasty, scientifically dubious ruling. The billboard on Route 21 was eventually taken down, replaced by a simple memorial marker. But the questions it posed have never been answered. The case file remains open, technically, though no active investigation is underway. 5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve 1945, giddy with anticipation. By morning, they were gone. Not dead, not proven dead, simply gone, erased from existence as completely as if they had never been born. Almost. The Sodder case is more than a mystery. It is a testament to the terrifying fragility of certainty. We assume that the truth will emerge. We assume that bones will be found, that evidence will speak, that justice will arrive, even if it arrives late. The Sodders waited a lifetime. Justice never came. This case also exposes the failures of small-town law enforcement in mid-century America, the rush to close cases, the reluctance to investigate powerful interests, the willingness to accept convenient explanations over inconvenient truths. 5 children deserved better. Their parents deserved better. George and Jennie Sodder lived the rest of their lives in a special kind of hell, the hell of not knowing. Were their children alive somewhere, living under different names, raised by strangers? Did they grow old? Did they have families of their own? Did they ever look up at the sky and try to remember a house on a hillside in West Virginia, a Christmas tree glittering in the window, the sound of their mother's voice calling them to bed? Or did something far darker happen? Something that has been buried so deeply that no investigation, no billboard, no amount of parental love could ever unearth it. What do you think happened to the Sodder children? Were they taken? Are they still out there in some form, in descendants who don't know their true heritage? Or has the truth been reduced to ash, just like that house on Route 21? Tell me in the comments. Because after 78 years, someone, somewhere, still knows the answer. If this story unsettled you, subscribe to Darkness Unveiled and hit the bell, because some cases don't end. They just go quiet.